From G.K. Chesterton, favorite Father Brown stories. The Perishing of the Pendragons. Father Brown was in no mood for adventures. He had lately fallen ill with overwork, and when he began to recover, his friend Flambeau had taken him on a cruise in a small yacht with Sir Cecil Fanshawe, a young Cornish squire and an enthusiast for Cornish coast scenery. But Brown was still rather weak. He was no very happy sailor, and though he was never of the sort that either grumbles or breaks down, his spirits did not rise above patience and civility. When the other two men praised the ragged violet sunset or the ragged volcanic crags, he agreed with them. When Flambeau pointed out a rock shaped like a dragon, he looked at it and thought it very like a dragon. When Fanshawe more excitedly indicated a rock that was like Merlin, he looked at it and signified assent. When Flambeau asked whether this rocky gate of the twisted river was not the gate of fairyland, he said yes. He heard the most important things and the most trivial with the same tasteless absorption. He heard that the coast was death to all but careful seamen. He also heard that ship's cat was asleep. He heard that Fanshawe couldn't find his cigar holder anywhere. He also heard the pilot deliver the oracle. Both eyes bright, she's all right. One eye winks, down she sinks. He heard Flambeau say to Fanshawe that no doubt this meant the pilot must keep both eyes open and be spry. And he heard Fanshawe say to Flambeau that, oddly enough, it didn't mean this. It meant that while they saw two lights of the coast lights, one near and the other distant, exactly side by side, they were in the right river channel. But that if one light was hidden behind the other, they were going on the rocks. He heard Fanshawe add that his county was full of such quaint fables and idioms. It was the very home of romance. He even pitted this part of Cornwall against Devonshire as a claimant to the laurels of Elizabethan seamanship. According to him, there had been captains among these coves and islets compared with whom Drake was practically a landsman. He heard Flambeau laugh and ask if perhaps the adventurous title of Westward Ho only meant that all Devonshire men wished they were living in Cornwall. He heard Fanshawe say there was no need to be silly, that not only had Cornish captains been heroes, but that they were heroes still, that near that very spot there was an old admiral, now retired, who was scarred by thrilling voyages full of adventure, and who had in his youth found the last group of 8 Pacific islands that was added to the chart of the world. This Cecil Fanshawe was, in person, of the kind that commonly urges such crude but pleasing enthusiasms, a very young man, light-haired, high-colored, with an eager profile, with boyish bravado of spirits, but an almost girlish delicacy of tint and type. The big shoulders, black brows, and black musketeer swagger of Flambeau were a great contrast. All these trivialities Brown heard and saw, but heard them as a tired man hears a tune in the railway wheels, or saw them as a sick man sees the pattern of his wallpaper. No one can calculate the turns of mood in convalescence, but Father Brown's depression must have had a great deal to do with his mere unfamiliarity with the sea. For as the river mouth narrowed like the neck of a bottle, and the water grew calmer, and the air warmer and more earthly, he seemed to wake up and take notice, like a baby. They had reached that phase just after sunset, when air and water both look bright, but earth and all its growing things look almost black by comparison. About this particular evenings, however, there was something exceptional. It was one of those rare atmospheres in which a smoked glass slide seems to have been slid away from between us and nature, so that even dark colors on that day looked more gorgeous than bright colors on cloudier days. The trampled earth of the river banks and the peaty stain in the pools did not look drab, but glowing umber, and the dark woods astir in the breeze did not look, as usual, dim blue with mere depth or distance, but more like wind-tumbled masses of some vivid violet blossom. This magic clearness and intensity in the colors was further forced on Brown's slowly reviving senses by something romantic and even secret in the very form of the landscape. The river was still well wide and deep enough for a pleasure boat so small as theirs, but the curves of the countryside suggested that it was closing in on either hand. The woods seemed to be making broken and flying attempts at bridge building, as if the boat were passing from the romance of a valley into the romance of a hollow, and so to the supreme romance of a tunnel. Beyond this mere look of things, there was little for Brown's freshening fancy to feed on. He saw no human beings except gypsies trailing along the river bank with faggots and oysters cut in the forest. And one sight no longer unconventional, but in such remote parts still uncommon, a dark-haired lady, bareheaded, and paddling her own canoe. If Father Brown ever attached any importance to either of these, he certainly forgot them at the next turn of the river, which brought in sight a singular object. The water seemed to widen and split, being cloven by the dark wedge of a fish-shaped and wooded islet. With the rate at which they went, the islet seemed to swim toward them like a ship with a very high prow, or, to speak more strictly, a very high funnel. For at the extreme point nearest them stood up an odd-looking building, unlike anything they could remember or connect with any purpose. It was not specially high, but it was too high for its breadth to be called anything but a tower. Yet it appeared to be built entirely of wood, and that in a most unequal and eccentric way. Some of the planks and beams were of good seasoned oak, some of such wood cut raw and recent, some again of white pine wood, and a great deal more of the same sort of wood painted black with tar. These black beams were set crooked or crisscross at all kinds of angles, giving the whole a most patchy and puzzling appearance. There were one or two windows, which appeared to be colored and leaded in an old-fashioned but more elaborate style. The travelers looked at it with that paradoxical feeling we have when something reminds us of something, and yet we are certain it is something very different. Father Brown, even when he was mystified, was clever in analyzing his own mystification, and he found himself reflecting that the oddity seemed to consist in a particular shape cut out in an incongruous material, as if one saw a top hat made of tin or a frock coat cut out of tartan. He was sure he had seen timbers of different tints arranged like that somewhere, but never in such architectural proportions. The next moment, a glimpse through the dark trees told him all he wanted to know, and he laughed. Through a gap in the foliage, there appeared for a moment one of those old wooden houses faced with black beams, which are still to be found here and there in England, but which most of us see imitated in some show called Old London or Shakespeare's England. It was in view only long enough for the priest to see that, however old-fashioned, it was a comfortable and well-kept country house, with flower beds in front of it. It had none of the piebald and crazy look of the tower that seemed made out of its refuse. "What on earth is this?" said Flambeau, who was still staring at the tower. Fanshawe's eyes were shining, and he spoke triumphantly. "Aha! You've not seen a place quite like this before, I fancy. That's why I brought you here, my friend. Now you shall see whether I exaggerate about the mariners of Cornwall. This place belongs to old Pendragon, whom we call the Admiral, though he retired before getting the rank. The spirit of Raleigh and Hawkins is memory with the Devon folk. It's a modern fact with the Pendragons. If Queen Elizabeth were to rise from the grave and come up this river in a gilded barge, she would be received by the Admiral in a house exactly such as she was accustomed to, in every corner and casement, in every panel on the wall or plate on the table. And she would find an English captain still talking fiercely of fresh lands to be found in little ships, as much as if she had dined with Drake." "She'd find a rum sort of thing in the garden," said Father Brown, "which would not please her Renaissance eye." That Elizabethan domestic architecture is charming in its way, but it's against the very nature of it to break out into turrets. And yet, answered Fanshawe, that's the most romantic and Elizabethan part of the business. It was built by the Pendragons in the very days of the Spanish Wars, and though it's needed patching and even rebuilding for another reason, it's always been rebuilt in the old way. The story goes that the lady of Sir Peter Pendragon built it in this place and to this height, because from the top you can just see the corner where the vessels turn into the river mouth, and she wished to be the first to see her husband's ship as he sailed home from the Spanish Main. For what other reason? Asked Father Brown. Do you mean that it has been rebuilt? Oh, there's a strange story about that too, said the young squire with relish. You are really in a land of strange stories. King Arthur was here, and Merlin, and the fairies before him. The story goes that Sir Peter Pendragon, who I fear had some of the faults of the pirates as well as the virtues of the sailor, was bringing home 3 Spanish gentlemen in honorable captivity, intending to escort them to Elizabeth's court. But he was a man of flaming and tigerish temper, and coming to high words with one of them, he caught him by the throat and flung him by accident or design into the sea. A second Spaniard, who was the brother of the first, instantly drew his sword and flew at Pendragon. And after a short but furious combat, in which both got 3 wounds in as many minutes, Pendragon drove his blade through the other's body, and the second Spaniard was accounted for. As it happened, the ship was already turned into the river mouth and was close to comparatively shallow water. The third Spaniard sprang over to the side of the ship, struck out for the shore, and was soon near enough to it to stand up to his waist in water. And turning again to face the ship and holding up both arms to heaven like a prophet, calling plagues upon the wicked city, he called out to Pendragon in a piercing and terrible voice that he at last was yet living, that he would go on living, that he would live forever, and that generation after generation the house of Pendragon should never see him or his, but should know by very certain signs that he and his vengeance were alive. With that he dived under the wave, and was either drowned or swam so long under water that no hair of his head was seen afterwards. There's that girl in the canoe again, said Flambeau irreverently, for a good-looking young woman would call him off any topic. She seems bothered by the queer tower just as we were. Indeed, the black-haired young lady was letting her canoe float slowly and silently past the strange islet, and was looking intently up at the strange tower, with a strong glow of curiosity in her oval and olive face. Never mind girls, said Fanshawe impatiently. There are plenty of them in the world, but not many things like the Pendragon Tower. As you may easily suppose, plenty of superstitions and scandals have followed in the track of the Spaniard's curse, and no doubt, as you would put it, any accident happening to this Cornish family would be connected with it by rural credulity. But it is perfectly true that this tower has been burnt down 2 or 3 times, and the family can't be called lucky, for more than 2, I think, of the admiral's near kin have perished by shipwreck, and one at least, to my own knowledge, on practically the same spot where Sir Peter threw the Spaniard overboard. What a pity, exclaimed Flambeau. She's going. When did your friend the admiral tell you this family history? Asked Father Brown, as the girl in the canoe paddled off, without showing the least intention of extending her interest from the tower to the yacht, which Fanshawe had already caused to lie alongside the island. Many years ago, replied Fanshawe. He hasn't been to sea for some time now, though he is as keen on it as ever. I believe there's a family compact or something. Well, here's the landing stage. Let's come ashore and see the old boy. And we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.